Okay, so let's try and unpack this a bit. Ever wonder what diplomacy actually, looks like?
Beyond just the big headlines and the official statements, you mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's so much more than just high-level meetings, right? Or agreements signed somewhere
Oh,
fancy.
definitely. It's this huge, complex web, interactions, deals, visits, even like public services that affect loads of people.
Right. And today we're doing a deep dive into some really interesting sources. We've got a whole set of annexures from a big annual report.
Yeah, they're pretty detailed.
And they give us this behind the scenes look at international engagement, specifically focusing on India's role in 2023, which was quite a dynamic year.
It certainly was.
So, our mission today is basically to pull out the key nuggets, the important insights from these annexures, give you a shortcut, really, to understanding the sheer scale of it all, the practical impact.
And what's great about these sources, these annexures, is just how granular they are. You get the detail.
Like what specifically?
Well, everything from the big international summits down to, say, specific bilateral agreements signed on a particular date, and even the reach of things like passport services.
Right, the nuts and bolts.
Exactly. It lets you see how the big policy ideas, the strategies, actually get translated into action. On the ground, across borders. It's the operational side of diplomacy, really.
Okay, so we're going to explore a few key themes then. India's G20 presidency is obviously a big one, that whole year-long effort.
Huge.
Then all the treaties and agreements signed, so many of them across all sorts of sectors.
Yeah, the volume is quite something.
And the high-level visits, the face-to-face diplomacy, and finally, like you said, the passport services network. Which sounds maybe a bit dry, but it's fundamental, isn't it?
Absolutely. It enables everything else in many ways.
So the big question is, what does all this tell us about how nations interact and maybe what it means for, individuals like you listening in this super connected world?
Let's get into it.
Okay, let's start with the G20 presidency. Because the scale here, it really is something else. India's presidency in 2023, it wasn't just about hosting that one big summit at the end.
No, not at all. It was essentially a year-long diplomatic marathon.
And the numbers are kind of staggering. We're talking about 227 meetings, 227 held throughout the year.
Just think about the logistics of that, the planning, the coordination.
Yeah,
It's immense.
it really is.
And if you zoom out a bit, look at the bigger picture, that volume, that number. It signifies a massive effort in multilateral diplomacy. It's a huge commitment.
It's not just showing up, is it?
No, it's about actively shaping the conversation across, well, a huge range of topics, and interestingly, across a really wide geographical spread within India.
Okay, touch on that geographical spread, because that inaugural meeting, the kickoff, that wasn't in Delhi, was it?
No, exactly. The kickoff meeting with heads of diplomatic mission, it set the tone. It was held in Swaraj Dweep, which is Havelock, in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, way back in November 2022, actually, from the 25th to 27th.
Wow, so right from the very start, they signaled this was going to be different, widespread, pan-Indian almost.
Precisely. It immediately suggested a unique approach, showcasing different parts of the country, not just the usual capital city focus.
And that widespread engagement, that really carried through, didn't it? Right into 2023 itself.
Absolutely. The early meeting set the pace. You had the first Sherpa meeting, crucial for the policy track in Udaipur, Rajasthan. Beautiful city. That was December 4th to 7th.
Okay.
And then, hot on its heels, the first Finance and Central Bank Deputies meeting in Bengaluru, Karnataka, the tech hub, from December 13th to 15th.
So hitting different regions, different kinds of cities right away. But it wasn't just high-level strategy, was it? The topics covered in the working groups, the sheer breadth is remarkable.
It really is. It reflects the G20's mandate, which is pretty holistic now. It covers almost every major global challenge.
So give us some examples, like what kind of areas did these working groups dive into?
Okay, we'll take development. That's always key for G20. They had discussions on accelerating implementation of SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, vital stuff.
Where were those held?
Those were in places like Udaipur and Mumbai. They also talked about data for development, recognizing how critical data is for achieving those goals.
Makes sense. What about the finance track?
Oh, the finance discussions were incredibly diverse. Everything from strengthening multilateral development banks, like World Bank, IMF, that was in Bengaluru, really important for global financial stability.
Right.
Then they tackled really pressing issues like the macroeconomic implications of food and security. a huge concern globally right now.
Definitely.
And they got into the weeds on newer topics, too, like central bank digital currencies, looking at the opportunities, the challenges, and also critical issues like combating tax evasion, corruption, and money laundering. Those discussions happened in Chandigarh. So real practical stuff impacting economies.
Yeah, not just theory. It sounds very grounded. What about infrastructure? Always a big topic.
Yes, infrastructure was a major focus. Meetings on financing cities of tomorrow, looking at sustainable urban growth, that was in Pune, and infrastructure taxonomies in Visakhapatnam, basically trying to standardize how we classify and finance these big projects.
And health. Especially after the pandemic, health must have been high on the agenda.
Absolutely. Under health, they discussed things like medical value tourism, India's growing role there, that was in Thiruvananthapuram, and critically, digital health in Goa, how technology can really transform healthcare delivery.
Okay, so development, finance, infrastructure, health. What about sustainability? That's got to be central.
Front and center, definitely.
Yeah.
Sustainability saw a lot of action. Meetings on capacity building of ecosystem, of scaling up sustainable finance in Guwahati, basically, how to get money flowing into green projects.
Careful.
Detailed talks on advanced tech like carbon capture, utilization and storage, CCUS in Bengaluru. Big environmental efforts like restoration of degraded landscapes in Gadanagar.
Practical environmental work.
Yeah, and also sharing best practices on water resources management, and even looking ahead to build a global green hydrogen ecosystem. So quite forward-looking on energy and environment.
Wow, that's comprehensive. And the digital side. India's obviously strong there.
Hugely prominent. The digital economy track really showcased India's focus. Discussions on digital public infrastructure, things like UPI, Aadhaar, and digital initiatives in specific states like Uttar Pradesh, that was in Lucknow.
Sharing that DPI model.
Exactly. Also, the role of global tech sector, that was discussed in Hyderabad. And the Digital Innovation Alliance Summit in Bengaluru, fostering tech collaboration.
Okay, makes sense. And you can't forget culture and tourism, right? Especially when showcasing India.
No, definitely not. The culture and tourism track was very active. Again, medical value tourism came up, linking health and tourism, but also things like rural tourism for community empowerment and archaeological tourism. Those discussions were in places like the Rann of Kutch and Khajuraho.
Leveraging heritage.
Precisely. And crucial sessions on protection and restitution of cultural properties, harnessing living heritage for a sustainable future, and promoting cultural and creative industries and the creative economy. That last one was in Srinagar. It shows a real appreciation for culture's economic and social value.
That's a really broad range. Any other key areas that stood out?
Yeah, a few others worth mentioning. Employment work focused on global skills harmonization, really important for workers moving across borders.
Okay.
Education looked at the role of digital technology. Agriculture meetings involved stock-taking G20 initiatives for food security.
Right.
Anti-corruption focused on using ICT information and communication tech for transparency. Disaster risk reduction emphasized early warning, early action, and building disaster-resilient infrastructure.
Very practical.
And trade and investment looked at things like trade finance and improving trade infrastructure. So you see, it really was a comprehensive agenda, touching almost every aspect of global governance.
It really paints a picture. Now, you mentioned the geographical spread earlier. You might be surprised, listening to this, just how widespread these meetings were. It wasn't just Delhi, Mumbai, Bengaluru.
No, not at all. And it makes you think, what does it actually mean for a country to host a global event like this? Not just in one or two main hubs, but across.
Yeah.
Well, the annexure lists 60 different cities in Union Territory.
60, that's incredible.
It really is. It suggests a very deliberate strategy, maybe to showcase India's diversity, its regional strength, to get more local economies involved, democratize the whole process, perhaps.
Feels like a statement, doesn't it?
A powerful one. We already mentioned Swaraj Dweep in the Andamans for the kickoff.
Right.
But then you had meetings in Udaipur in Rajasthan, showcasing history, the Rann of Kutch in Gujarat, highlighting unique culture and landscape. Even Leh and Ladakh, the high-altitude desert region.
Amazing location.
And it goes on. Kavarati in the Lakshadweep Islands, Srinagar in Jammu and Kashmir, Shillong in Meghalaya, Kohima in Nagaland, Imphal in Manipur, Gangtok in Sikkim, Itanagar in Arunachal Pradesh, even Diu in Dadra and Nagar Haveli and Daman and Diu.
Wow, that really drives home the point. It wasn't just delegates meeting in conference rooms. It was about bringing the world to India in all its diversity.
Exactly. Inviting the world to experience the whole nation, not just the capital.
Okay, so with all these meetings, all these locations, How does the G20 actually work? How do decisions get made? It's not just one big chaotic meeting, presumably.
No, it's quite structured. It operates through different mechanisms or tracks that run in parallel.
Okay, like what?
Well, first you have the Sherpa track. This is where the personal representatives of the leaders, the Sherpas, do a lot of the groundwork on non-financial issues.
So the policy stuff.
Exactly. It covers that whole broad range we discussed. Agriculture, anti-corruption, culture, digital economy, development, education, employment, environment and climate, energy, health, trade and investment, tourism, all that stuff. They hammer out the policy details, draft declarations.
Got it. The Sherpa track for policy. What else?
What? Running alongside it, you have the finance track. Pretty self-explanatory.
Economics and finance.
Right. This focuses purely on economic and financial matters. You've got working groups on the global macroeconomic framework, international financial architecture, the rules of the global financial system, infrastructure financing, sustainable finance.
All the money matters.
Pretty much. Plus things like financial inclusion, the Joint Finance and Health Task Force, which became really important during COVID international tax issues, and broader financial sector regulation. These two tracks, Sherpa and finance, are really the core engines.
Feeding into the main decisions.
Exactly. Their work leads up to the ministerial meetings and ultimately the Leaders' Summit.
But it's not just government officials, is it? Doesn't the G20 try to bring in other voices?
Yes, absolutely. That's where the engagement groups come in. These are crucial for bringing diverse perspectives from outside formal government circles.
Like who?
Well, you have groups representing business. That's the Business 20 or B20. Civil society organizations, the Civil 20, C20. Labor unions, Labor 20, L20. Parliamentarians, Parliament 20, P20. Scientists, Science 20, S20. Supreme Audit Institutions, SAI 20.
Okay, quite a few.
And it continues. Startup 20 for the startup ecosystem. Think 20 for think tanks and researchers. Urban 20 for city-level issues. Women 20 focusing on gender equality. And Youth 20, engaging young leaders.
So a real effort to get input from different sectors of society.
Definitely. Each group provides recommendations, insights. It makes the whole process more inclusive, more grounded in different realities.
And do these groups spin off specific initiatives?
Sometimes, yes. Or there are related initiatives. For example, there's the Research and Innovation Initiative Gathering, RIG. The Space Economy Leaders Meeting, SELEM, focusing on the business of space. G20 Empower, which is specifically about women's economic empowerment.
Interesting.
There's also the Chief Science Advisors Roundtable, CSR, bringing top government scientists together. The Meeting of Agricultural Chief Scientists, MACS. And they even tackled cutting-edge issues like that G20 conference on crime and security in the age of NFTs, AI, and metaverse.
Wow, very current. So these aren't just talk shops, they're platforms for collaboration and looking ahead.
Precisely. And on top of all this, you have standalone ministerial meetings.
Okay, explain those.
These bring together ministers responsible for specific areas like the Foreign Ministers Meeting or the Ministerial Meeting on Women Empowerment. They allow for focused discussions and decisions within those specific policy domains.
Right. Getting the key decision makers in a room for a specific topic makes sense. And all this work, all these tracks and groups, they culminate in the big one, the Leaders' Summit, the New Delhi Summit in September 2023. Looking at who attended, well, the guest list itself tells a story, doesn't it?
It really does. And a key question that always comes up at these summits is about representation. Who gets a seat at the table? And the big news from Delhi was, of course, the African Union becoming a permanent member.
That was huge, wasn't it?
Absolutely huge. A really significant historic moment. It fundamentally changes the dynamic, elevating the voice of an entire continent within this critical global group.
So who was actually there from the G20 members? We saw the big names, right?
Yes, the usual G20 leaders were mostly there, presidents, prime ministers. You had Joe Biden from the U.S., Rishi Sunak from the U.K., Emmanuel Macron from France, Olaf Scholz from Germany, Fumio Kishida from Japan.
Lula from Brazil. Ramaphosa from South Africa.
Yes, Lula da Silva from Brazil, Cyril Ramaphosa from South Africa, many others. It's also worth noting the representation from China and Russia. China sent Premier Li Qiang, and Russia sent Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. That itself reflects the complex global situation.
And the African Union's first summit as a member who represented them.
They were represented by President Azali Assoumani, who was the chair of the AU at the time.
Okay. And it wasn't just the G20 members present. India invited guest countries, too.
That's right. Several key guest countries attended, broadening the conversation. Leaders like Sheikh Hasina from Bangladesh, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi from Egypt, Lee Hsien Loong from Singapore, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan from the UAE, Mark Rutte from the Netherlands.
So bringing in important regional players.
Exactly. It signals a more inclusive approach, ensuring perspectives beyond the core G20 economies are heard.
And what about international organizations? They play a big role too.
Definitely. Their presence underscores the need for coordinated global action. You had the heads of major institutions there, the Asian Development Bank, ADB, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, CDRI, which India initiated the Financial Stability Board, FSB, the ILO, the IMF, the International Solar Alliance, ISA, another India-led initiative.
OECD, World Bank, WHO, WTO, UN.
All of them. The OECD, World Bank, WHO, WTO, the UN Secretary General. Their participation highlights that tackling global challenges needs everyone working together, governments, international bodies. A real multi-agency effort.
Now, there was also a virtual leaders summit later in the year, wasn't there? In November.
Yes, on November 22nd. It served as a follow-up, a way to maintain momentum, especially as India was preparing to hand over the presidency to Brazil.
Did everyone attend that one too?
The representation shifted slightly. Interestingly, Vladimir Putin participated virtually for Russia this time. The U.S. was represented by Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, and the U.K. by Deputy PM Oliver Dowden.
So a bit more flexibility in format.
Exactly. It shows how modern diplomacy is adapting, using virtual tools for continuity and follow-through, especially for these kinds of handover or stock-taking moments.
Okay, so that's the G20, a massive undertaking. But beyond that huge multilateral stage, there's the day-to-day work of diplomacy, right? The bilateral stuff.
Absolutely. And that's where the annexures reveal an incredible volume of activity in 2023. Thousands of interactions, agreements. It shows a really persistent, comprehensive diplomatic effort.
And looking through these agreements, what really strikes you is the sheer variety. It's not just trade deals.
Not at all. It's incredibly multi-pronged. You see agreements on social welfare, tech exchange, cultural ties, defense, environment.
Yeah.
It reflects a truly holistic approach to foreign policy, building relationships on many, many levels.
How do these actually come into being? The annexures mention things like full powers and ratifications. What did those mean?
Right. Those are the formalities.
Yeah.
Full powers is basically the official authorization given to someone, like an ambassador or a minister, to negotiate and sign an agreement on behalf of the government.
Like giving them the green light to sign.
Exactly. The annexure lists examples for 2023, like granting full powers for a customs cooperation deal with Spain in December, a really important social security agreement with Argentina in July, a defense cooperation pact with Romania in March.
Okay.
And significantly also for that Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, IPEF agreement, specifically the part relating to supply chain resilience in November. That signals India's commitment to that regional economic framework.
So full powers is the authorization to sign. What about ratification?
Ratification is the next crucial step.
Yeah.
After an agreement is signed, it usually needs to be formally approved by the government back home, often by parliament, depending on the country's laws to become legally binding under domestic and international law.
Yeah.
It's what makes the agreement operational.
Got it. So it makes it official legally. Were there many important ratifications in 2023?
Yes, the list highlights several key ones. Things like customs cooperation with Armenia, an audiovisual co-production agreement with Australia, good for film industries in both countries, a visa exemption for diplomatic passport holders with Austria.
Migration seems big too.
Very big. Ratifications of migration agreements with Australia, Austria, and Germany. These are increasingly vital. Also, a protocol to avoid double taxation with Brazil, important for business.
What else?
The headquarters agreement for the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, CDRI, was ratified, solidifying its base in India. Visa exemption deals with Fiji and Pyre, strengthening ties with Pacific nations. Grant assistance for the Philippines, an agreement protecting space technology with Russia, a deal on combating illicit trafficking with Saudi Arabia.
So ratification is really that final step that brings these agreements to life.
Exactly. It translates the diplomatic intent into legal reality.
Okay, there are so many agreements listed in Annexure the 8th. Instead of just reading them out, maybe we can group them by theme
Both.
to get a better sense of the priorities.
Yeah, that's a good approach. It helps you see the patterns, the strategic focus, and it makes you think, how do all these different pieces, economic, cultural, security, how do they all fit together?
Right, how do they form the bigger picture of foreign policy?
Exactly. It's like weaving a complex fabric. Each thread contributes to the overall strength and design, addressing immediate needs, but also building for the long term.
Okay, let's start with a really important theme, migration and social security. Huge for India, with its large diaspora.
Absolutely critical. And you can see India was very active here in 2023. That Social Security agreement with Argentina, signed in September, is a great example ensuring Indian workers there get their benefits.
And the mobility partnerships?
Yes, comprehensive migration and mobility partnership agreements were signed with Australia in May and Austria also in May. Plus, visa exemptions for diplomatic passport holders with Austria and Fiji. And a declaration of intent on migration and mobility with Guyana in April.
So, lots of work to make movement easier and protect citizens abroad.
Definitely. And what's really striking is the agreement with Israel. It's listed multiple times on November 3rd for temporary employment of Indian workers in specific labor market sectors.
Multiple agreements on the same day.
It seems so. Or perhaps phases of an agreement. It clearly highlights a major focus on matching Indian workers with specific labor needs in Israel, presumably with protections built in.
Interesting. What about Italy?
Similar activity with Italy, a declaration of intent on migration and mobility in March, followed by a full migration and mobility agreement in November.
And elsewhere.
An agreement with Mauritius in May regarding employment of workers from India. And agreements with Oman and Equatorial Guinea, allowing dependents of officials to work that helps families. It shows a really practical focus on the realities of people moving and working abroad.
Okay, shifting gears. Digital transformation and IT cooperation. India as a digital power, this must be prominent.
Very much so.
Yeah.
You see MoEs on information technology and cybersecurity signed with Egypt back in January, covering both the opportunities and the risks of the digital age.
And sharing India's digital success stories.
Yes, that's a clear theme. Papua New Guinea signed MoUs, looks like 2 of them, in July, on sharing successful digital solutions implemented at population scale for digital transformation. That's the India Stack Idea UPI. Aadhaar being offered as a model.
Exporting the DPI model.
Exactly. And it wasn't just PNG. Suriname signed MoUs in June for sharing digital solutions and also for supporting IT education in their vocational schools. Capacity building.
Who else?
Tanzania in October, Trinidad and Tobago in August,
Yeah.
Kenya in December, Oman also in December, all signed similar MoUs on sharing successful digital solutions, and a broader MoU on cooperation in digital technologies with France in July.
So it's a global push, not just South-South.
Seems like it. It positions India as a leader in digital public goods, a partner in digital transformation worldwide.
What about security and defense cooperation? Any key agreements there?
Yes, a couple stood out. A defense cooperation agreement with Romania was signed in March. And cooperation in the field of defense agreed with Italy in October, deepening ties with European partners. And on a more practical level, a technical agreement between the Indian Navy and the Tanzania Shipping Agencies Corporation in October.
What does that mean, practically?
It likely facilitates things like port visits, logistical support, maybe information sharing, enhancing maritime security cooperation, especially in the Indian Ocean. So yeah, building security partnerships.
Right. Now, let's talk about economic infrastructure and development assistance, particularly these quick impact projects, or QIPs.
Ah, yes, the QIPs. These are fascinating because they're designed to deliver quick, visible benefits to local communities, often smaller budgets, but high local impact and goodwill.
So tangible help on the ground.
Exactly. But first, on the bigger economic picture, that IPF agreement on supply chain resilience concluded in November was significant.
Right, securing supply chains. But the QIPs.
Okay, QIPs. India provided grant assistance for a mine clearing project in Cambodia in August. Very important humanitarian work. Laos got 3 separate grants for QIPs in education, health, and technology in July. Madagascar received a grant for a high-impact community development project in September.
And the Maldives seems to have a really long list.
An incredibly long list. It shows just how granular this assistance can be. QIPs in the Maldives covered sports facilities, complexes, gyms, running tracks, volley courts in various islands, community development and arts center in Male, new council offices, furniture for community centers.
Education and health, too.
Yes, school buses for several cities, school digitalization programs, upgrading computer labs, mental health units in hospitals, upgrading other hospital facilities, even basic infrastructure like installing streetlights in one island, near Drakande, and support for fisheries, like establishing a fish processing plant.
That's incredibly specific and responsive to local needs.
It really is. It shows a very tailored approach to development aid, working directly with local communities.
What about Mauritius?
Mauritius had an interesting cluster approach. Multiple MoUs signed in January and June for implementing community development projects across different geographical or thematic clusters, clusters 2 through 8, and then X through 12, suggests a coordinated, large-scale effort.
And Myanmar.
Myanmar received QIPs in November for things like a departmental e-library, electrifying rural villages using small wind turbines, and providing water supply using solar power in drought-affected areas, addressing basic needs with sustainable tech.
Suriname also had several QIPs mentioned.
Yes, grant assistance in March covering various things, rehabilitating public squares for recreation, building a synthetic jogging track, promoting safe pedestrian crossings near schools, even supporting a chemical teaching lab at the university, attic use. Real community-level improvements.
Seychelles and the Philippines.
Seychelles got grant assistance for small development projects, Phase 2, in November. The Philippines received grant aid for QIPs and also established a joint working group on financial technology, mixing aid with future-focused tech collaboration.
And Tanzania, a bigger project there.
Yes. An OU was signed in October for the setting up of an industrial park in Tanzania by the Jawaharlal Nehru Port Authority, JNPA, from India. That's a significant economic partnership, potentially fostering much larger scale growth.
Okay, let's move to environment, agriculture, and natural resources. Any highlights?
Definitely a focus area. Agreements on cooperation in agriculture and related sectors were signed with Chile in May, Egypt in June, and Greece, the Hellenic Republic, in August, sharing expertise, improving food security.
But the one everyone remembers is probably the cheetahs, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The MOU with South Africa signed way back in January on cooperation to the reintroduction of cheetah in India. That captured public imagination. It's a fantastic example of conservation diplomacy, biodiversity as a shared goal. Very visible, very unique.
A memorable piece of diplomacy.
For sure. Elsewhere, Suriname signed a detailed work plan for agriculture cooperation for 2023-2027 in June. And a really important one with the UAE in January, focused on green hydrogen developments and investments.
Sustainable energy cooperation.
Exactly. A key partnership looking towards future energy sources.
Next up, cultural, educational, and youth exchange. The soft power stuff.
Vital for building long-term understanding and people-to-people ties. We saw a cultural exchange program for 2023-26 signed with Colombia in April.
Egypt again.
Yes, MUSE with Egypt in January covering both culture and youth matters, a broad engagement. France signed a letter of intent in July regarding cooperation on the new National Museum in India and museology high-level cultural partnership.
Italy, Malaysia, Mauritius.
Italy signed an executive program for cultural cooperation for 2023-2027 in November. Malaysia had cooperation in broadcasting in November. Mauritius also had broadcasting cooperation in May, plus a broader program for cultural cooperation for 2023-2026 signed in July.
Youth and sports seem to be a focus, too.
Yes, Seychelles signed an MU on youth and sports cooperation in November, and Tanzania did the same in October. Engaging younger generations is key.
What about the UAE and education? I remember hearing about an IIT campus.
That's a big one. An MOU on cooperation in the field of education with the UAE was signed in November, and crucially, there was specific agreement in July on planning to establish IIT Delhi Abu Dhabi. That's exporting India's top-tier higher education brands.
Significant move. Any others?
An MOU with Japan on Japanese language education in India in March. Cooperation in sports with Kenya in December, and culture with Oman also in December. So a really wide net for cultural and educational partnerships.
Okay, how about space and technology? Beyond the digital side we already covered.
India is definitely pushing boundaries here. An MOU between ISRO and Mauritius in November for joint small satellite development, building space capabilities together.
It's France.
A joint declaration in July between ISRO and CNES, the French Space Agency, concerning joint development in the field of launchers. That points to cooperation on pretty advanced space technology.
And the U.S., the Artemis Accords.
Yes, that was a major strategic signing in June. India joined the Artemis Accords, which are principles for cooperation in civil space exploration, Moon, Mars, asteroids for peaceful purposes.
What's the significance of that?
It positions India firmly within the group of nations leading future space exploration efforts, committed to responsible behavior in space. It's a big statement about India's space ambitions and its role in global space governance.
Okay, one more broad category. Institutional cross-cutting cooperation. This seems like a catch-all for various other agreements.
Sort of, yeah. It covers agreements with international bodies or those that don't fit neatly elsewhere. For example, India signed a host country agreement in August for the BIMSTEC Center for Weather and Climate, BIMSTEC being the Bay of Bengal group.
Right, and China, there's an agreement listed with China.
Yes, the annexure lists an agreement on political parameters and guiding principles for the settlement of India-China boundary question, signed or perhaps reaffirmed on September 12. It indicates that despite border tensions, some level of diplomatic engagement and dialogue framework exists or was worked on.
Okay. Medical regulation.
Cooperation in medical products regulation agreed with Ecuador in November and Suriname in June. Important for public health, ensuring drug safety standards.
Egypt again, with a strategic partnership.
Yes, a strategic partnership agreement signed with Egypt in June. Interestingly, it's listed twice, one marked yet to come into force, suggesting a phased implementation or different components. Shows a deep commitment.
Guyana, Nepal.
An air services agreement with Guyana in April, better connectivity. Nepal saw a flurry of agreements in May and June. Cooperation in petroleum and natural gas, a broad general MU, collaboration between foreign service training institutes, and a revised treaty of transit. Underscores the really close, multifaceted relationship.
Netherlands. Papua New Guinea.
Maritime cooperation with the Netherlands in April. With Papua New Guinea, a reciprocal visa waiver and agreement on Foreign Office consultations in May, facilitating travel and regular diplomatic talks.
Slovakia, Uzbekistan, UN agencies.
Cooperation on regulating safe use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes with Slovakia's regulator in September. Disaster management cooperation with Uzbekistan in April. And agreements with UN bodies, UNDP on weather information services in June, and the World Food Program on technical collaboration in January, showing commitment to multilateralism and development goals.
Sri Lanka.
Cooperation in renewable energy agreed in July, aligning with climate goals and regional energy cooperation.
No, one fascinating subsection here lists agreements involving entities other than government ministries. It's not just the Ministry of External Affairs doing this work.
Exactly. And this really highlights the multi-layered nature of modern diplomacy. It's not strictly top-down or government-to-government anymore. You have think tanks, cultural bodies, judicial branches, even electoral commissions forging their own international ties.
So broadening the network of influence and cooperation.
Precisely. For instance, the Indian Council of World Affairs, ICWA, a major think tank, signed an MOU with the Belarusian Institute of Strategic Research in March, fostering dialogue between policy research communities.
And the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, ICCR, they seem incredibly active.
Hugely active.
Yeah.
The list shows ICCR setting up numerous chairs or professorships of Indian studies and languages all over the world.
Word about.
University of Guelph in Canada, Chinese University of Hong Kong, University of West Indies in Jamaica, Jagiellonian University in Poland, University of Valladolid in Spain, specifically for Hindi, Sabaragamuwa University in Sri Lanka, also Hindi, University of Houston, Indian Studies in Tamil, Solomon Islands National University, Indian Studies Economics, University of Zambia, Indian Studies, Silpakorn University in Thailand, Sanskrit.
Wow, that's global.
And even specific courses like a Purohit priest training course with the Mauritius Sanatan Dharma Temple Federation and language chairs in Tajikistan and Bulgaria. It's a massive effort in academic and cultural diplomacy.
Beyond culture and academia.
Parliamentary links too. The Lok Sabha, India's lower house, signed a joint intent and protocol on parliamentary cooperation with Mongolia's state Great Hurul in July, strengthening ties between legislatures.
Election Commission too.
Yes. The Election Commission of India, renowned globally, signed an MOU on cooperation in electoral management with Seychelles Electoral Commission in September, sharing best practices in democracy.
And the courts.
Even the judiciary. The Supreme Court of India signed an MOU on judicial cooperation with the Supreme Court of Singapore in September, facilitating legal understanding and perhaps mutual assistance.
And diplomatic training institutes.
Yes, the Sushma Swaraj Institute of Foreign Service, where Indian diplomats are trained, established formal relationships with its counterpart institute in Nepal in June and with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Panama in January, building capacity and networks for future diplomats.
It really shows how diplomacy permeates so many different institutions, doesn't it? Building connections at multiple levels.
It absolutely does. It's a much broader ecosystem than people often realize.
Okay, so we've talked G20, we've talked agreements, but diplomacy isn't just paper, is it? It's about relationships. Which brings us to high-level visits, the face-to-face stuff.
Crucial. Beyond the written word, that personal contact, the direct engagement between leaders and ministers, that's often where the real breakthroughs happen, or where trust is built.
How important are these visits in the grand scheme?
Hugely important. They're not just photo ops, though those matter too. They signal priorities. They open doors for candid conversations that might not happen otherwise. They solidify the personal chemistry or lack thereof that can really influence relationships between countries. Many of the agreements we just discussed were probably finalized or spurred on during these visits.
Makes sense. Now, in 2023, virtual diplomacy was still a thing, right? Even post-pandemic.
Oh, yes, definitely. It's become a permanent tool in the diplomatic toolkit. India hosted two significant virtual summits. The Voice of Global South Summit.
When were those?
The first was early in the year, January 12th, and the second was later, November 17th.
And the purpose?
These were really about India positioning itself as a leader for developing nations, providing a platform for them to voice shared concerns and priorities, especially in the context of the G20 and other global forums, a significant diplomatic initiative.
Did virtual meetings lead to concrete outcomes too?
They did, particularly in digital connectivity. There's the joint virtual launch of the UPI Pay Now linkage between India and Singapore in February. That was a big deal for cross-border payments. Real-world impact from a virtual launch.
Right.
Also, the virtual inauguration of the India-Bangladesh Friendship Pipeline in March, and another virtual inauguration of projects with the Prime Minister of Bangladesh in November. So using virtual means to launch and oversee tangible cooperation.
Any other major virtual events?
India participated in the U.S.-led Summit for Democracy in March, hosted the SCO Shanghai Cooperation Organization Council of Heads of State meeting virtually in July, and as we mentioned, that follow-up virtual G20 Leaders Summit in November.
So a real hybrid approach. Using virtual where it makes sense for efficiency or inclusion.
Exactly. It allows for flexibility and broader participation sometimes.
But the physical visits, the travel, that still happened extensively. Looking at the outgoing visits by India's top leadership president, vice president, prime minister, the schedule looks packed.
It really does. It reflects a very active, engaged foreign policy. The president of India visited Suriname and Serbia in early June.
Okay.
The vice president visited the UK in early May, likely for the coronation events, but also bilateral meetings.
And the prime minister's travel looks like a lot.
Extremely busy.
Yeah.
In May alone, visits to Japan for G7 outreach, Papua New Guinea, and Australia. A clear Indo-Pacific focus there.
Then June.
June saw state visits to the USA and Egypt. Very significant partnerships.
July.
July trips to France for Bastille Day celebrations and bilaterals and the UAE. Key strategic partners in Europe and the Gulf.
August.
August involved visits to South Africa for the BRICS Summit and then Greece. Expanding engagement in Africa and Europe.
September.
September was Indonesia for ASEAN and East Asia summits.
And later in the year.
Another visit to the UAE at the very end of November, early December, likely for the COP28 Climate Summit and related meetings.
Wow. That is a global itinerary. Japan, Australia, PNG, US, Egypt, France, UAE, South Africa, Greece, Indonesia. It really underscores a proactive, globe-spanning foreign policy.
No doubt about it. A clear signal of India's intent to be a major player on the world stage, engaging partners across continents.
And diplomacy is a two-way street, right? While Indian leaders were traveling, India was also hosting a lot of high-level visitors.
Absolutely. The annexures show a steady stream of incoming visits, signifying India's growing importance as a diplomatic hub and a partner of choice.
Who came early in 2023?
Well, January was busy. The president of Suriname was a special guest of honor for Pravasi Partia Diwas, the diaspora convention. The president of Guyana was the chief guest for the same event, highlighting those diaspora connections.
And the president of Egypt.
Yes. President Sisi of Egypt paid a state visit from January 24th to 26th. That was a really significant visit aimed at elevating the relationship to a strategic partnership. He was also the chief guest for India's Republic Day parade.
Big honor. Anyone else early on?
The president of the UN General Assembly, Saba Karosi, visited end of January-Feb. Canada's foreign minister, Melanie Joly, came in February, as did New Zealand's foreign minister, Nanaia Mahuta. Deputy PMs from Fiji and Mauritius also visited in February. Lots of activity.
The German chancellor came too, right? Olaf Scholz.
Yes, a very important state visit by Chancellor Scholz on February 25th, 26th, underscoring the strength of the India-Germany strategic partnership. Trade, tech, green energy likely key topics.
And a royal visit?
Yes, the Crown Prince and Crown Princess of Denmark visited from late February into early March. Adds that element of cultural diplomacy and focus on areas like green transition where Denmark is strong.
But the biggest gathering, in terms of ministers, must have been the G20 foreign ministers meeting in March.
Oh, absolutely. March 1st and 2nd. That was a huge diplomatic convening. Just look at the list of attendees from G20 members alone. Foreign ministers from basically every G20 country were there.
Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada.
Yep, Cafiero from Argentina, Wong from Australia, Vieira from Brazil, Joly from Canada.
China, France, Germany, Indonesia.
King Gang from China, Colonna from France, Baerbock from Germany, Marsudis from Indonesia,
Italy, Japan, Mexico, Korea.
Tayani from Italy, Hayashi from Japan, Ebrard from Mexico, Park Jin from South Korea,
Russia, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Turkey.
Lavrov from Russia, Prince Faisal from Saudi Arabia, Pandor from South Africa, Savazoglu from Turkey,
UK, US, EU.
Cleverly from the UK, Blinken from the US, and Borrell representing the EU. It was a full house.
And guest countries sent their foreign ministers too.
Yes, foreign ministers from invited guest countries like Bangladesh, Momin, Egypt, Shukri, and Mauritius Ganu also attended.
That meeting alone, bringing all those top diplomats together, it really highlights India's convening power in 2023, doesn't it? Setting the stage for the Leaders' Summit later.
Absolutely. The ability to get all those key players in a room, engaging in dialogue, despite global tensions, that speaks volumes about India's growing diplomatic weight and its role as a potential bridge builder.
Okay, we've covered the high-level diplomacy, the agreements, the summits. Now let's shift focus to something seemingly more mundane, but actually fundamental: passport services.
Right, because all this global engagement, the travel, the diaspora connections, it all relies on people being able to get passports easily and efficiently. It's the foundational infrastructure for mobility.
And these annexures detail the network within India. It makes you think, how does this domestic setup actually support the bigger global ambitions?
Well, it's a critical enabler, isn't it? Easy access to passports facilitates tourism, business travel, students going abroad, workers seeking opportunities, people visiting family. All strands of that global connection. Without an efficient passport system, a lot of that engagement just can't happen.
So what does the network look like? It starts with the main passport offices, the POs.
Yes, the passport offices are the main regional hubs. The annexure lists 37 of them across India,
Where are they located generally?
mostly in major cities and state capitals: Ahmedabad, Bengaluru, Chennai, Delhi, Hyderabad, Kolkata, Mumbai, Pune, covering the big states like Gujarat, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, West Bengal, Telangana, and Delhi itself. They're the core centers.
But they added more accessible centers too, the PSKs, Passport Seva Kendras.
Exactly. The PSKs were a major initiative to modernize and streamline the process, making it more user-friendly and efficient. These are dedicated centers, often run in partnership with private companies like TCS to handle applications. There are 93 PSKs listed.
And are these just in the big metros as well?
They are heavily concentrated in major cities, often with multiple PSKs in one city to handle the volume. Like Bengaluru has Lalbagh and Sai Arcade PSKs. Delhi has RK Puram and Herald House. Mumbai has Andheri, Lower Parel, Malad. Chennai has a Midjikarai and Salgimam. Hyderabad has a Mirpet and Begumpet.
But also in some smaller cities.
Yes, importantly, they also established PSKs in several Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. Places like Hubli Dharwad in Karnataka, Sikar in Rajasthan, Karimnagar in Telangana, Ambala in Haryana, Ludhiana in Punjab, and even in the northeast like Aizawl, Dimapur, Imphal, Itanagar, Shillong, and other places like Kota, Udaipur, Kannur, Malappuram, Gorakhpur, Varanasi. So extending the reach beyond just the top metros.
Okay, but the really big expansion in accessibility seems to be the Post Office Passport Seva Kendras, the POPSKs. This sounds like a clever idea.
It's a brilliant idea, actually, leveraging the incredible reach of India's postal network. Post offices are everywhere, even in very remote areas. So setting up passport service counters within existing post offices, it dramatically increases accessibility for people in smaller towns and rural areas.
How many of these are there?
The annexure lists 434 functional POPSKs. 434. That's a massive network.
Wow, that really takes the service to the grassroots level.
It absolutely does. It democratizes access. People don't have to travel hours to a major city just to submit their passport application.
Can you give some examples of where these POPSKs are to show
Oh.
the reach?
Sure. Look at Andhra Pradesh,
Yeah.
Anandapur, Bakatla, Gudivada, Rajamundry, Srikakulam. These aren't the main cities.
Bihar.
Ara, Banka, Bhatia, Buxar, Gaya, Madhubani, Purnia, Saharsa, Supal, Siddhamari, reaching deep into the districts.
Chhattisgarh, Islands, Northeast.
Chhattisgarh, Bilaspur, Durg, Korba, Raygar. Even Port Blair in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands has one. Assam, Barpeta, Dhubri, Jorhat, Nagam, Okaro, Chaibasa, Diogar, Dhanbad, Jiradi, Jamshedpur.
Karnataka, Kerala, remote territories.
Karnataka has them in places like Ankola, Bagalkot, Belagavi, Davanchir, Gadag, Hassan, Raichur, Shivamoga, Udupi, Kerala, Changanur, Katapana, Nenmara, Palakkad, Kasargod, even Leh and Ladakh and Kavarati and Lakshadweep, Himachal Pradesh, Hamirpur, Kangra, Kulu, Mandi,
It's truly extensive. Even tiny states or UTs seem covered.
Yes, Arunachal Pradesh has them in Changlang and Konsa, Manipur in Cauching, Meghalaya in Tura, Goa in Margao, Daman and Silvassa in Dadra and Nagar Haveli, and Daman in Diu.
And the big states must have scores of them.
Oh yes, Uttar Pradesh has a huge number listed: Agra, Aligarh, Ayodhya, Azamgarh, Balia, Bareilly, Gorakhpur, Kanpur, Lucknow, Varanasi, Prayagraj, Rampur. The list goes on and on. Same for Rajasthan, Tamil Nadu, West Bengal. It's a clear strategy to use the post office network to ensure that getting a passport isn't a barrier to international mobility for any citizen, regardless of where they live.
It really paints a picture of the essential groundwork needed to support all that high-level global engagement we discussed earlier.
Exactly. One enables the other.
So let's try and pull all these threads together. We've dived deep into these annexures, looked at the G20, the treaties, the visits, the passport network. What's the big takeaway?
Well, I think it shows that India's international engagement in 2023 was incredibly dynamic, complex, and really multifaceted. It wasn't just one thing. It was operating on so many levels simultaneously.
From the grand global stage of the G20 shaping policy.
Right, down to the very practical level of signing specific bilateral deals on everything from, cheetahs to digital technology.
And even making sure citizens in small towns can get a passport. It's this intricate tapestry, isn't it?
It really is. And connecting it to the bigger picture, it underscores that diplomacy isn't just a series of political announcements. It's a living, breathing network, relationships, mutual benefit, addressing shared problems.
And it reflects a strategy.
Oh, definitely. You can see a strategic vision trying to weave together different strands: economic growth, cultural influence, tech advancement, security partnerships, and tackling those big global challenges like climate change or health. It's how a nation actively positions itself in a really complex world.
Finding partners, building influence across all sorts of areas.
Exactly. Seeking partnerships across a huge diversity of domains.
So, for you listening, what stands out from this deep dive? We've seen how every handshake, every agreement signed, every new passport office opened, they all add up. They contribute to how a nation like India navigates the world stage.
Yeah, these seemingly small details, these annexure entries, they collectively define a nation's influence, its ability to cooperate, its global footprint.
So maybe the next time you hear about international relations, think about this. Think about how these detailed, sometimes technical pieces of diplomatic work actually impact global cooperation, and ultimately how they touch the lives of everyday people, both in India and around the world, often in ways we don't even realize.
It's all connected.
Absolutely. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep connecting those dots. We'll be here for your next deep dive.